Some years ago, back when I was a seminary professor, one of my students shared with me in confidence that he was having doubts, specifically doubts about the historical resurrection of Jesus. He decided one day to share those doubts with a colleague. Now, this individual, he had been working for more than a decade at the same very well-known Christian parachurch ministry, and he was one of the beloved employees of this ministry where he'd been for more than 10 years. And so he shared his doubts about the historical resurrection of Jesus with a colleague in confidence. A day later, he was pulled into the office of his supervisor and queried, would say interrogated about those doubts. That person had breached the trust that he had placed in them by going to his supervisor and sharing that he had doubts about the historical resurrection of Jesus. It was the ultimate betrayal. Now, let's be clear that this individual's performance was stellar in the role. He loved people, the people he worked with, they loved him. He was a well-respected employee, worker, diligent, hardworking, a mentor to others. And he would never share his doubts incautiously. He shared them with me as his theology professor, and he had shared them then with this individual at work, thinking he could trust that individual, but it turned out he could not. He was terminated afterwards and given 2 weeks severance. So he shared honest doubts he had, and the response was betrayal. What would justify a person betraying an individual like that who had confided in them personal doubts? Well, I can't get in that person's head, but I take it, I assume that they had a very reductionistic understanding of Christian faith, that Christian faith is about assent to particular doctrines. And if you cannot always affirm all of those doctrines in good confidence with maximal conviction, then you are a liar, maybe, and you ought to step back from whatever ministry involves you assenting to those doctrines. But I think that that's just a very, very wrong-headed understanding of what Christian faith is. I explain that at some length in my book, The Doubter's Creed. But let me just paraphrase the Apostle Paul here for a moment. I could know every N.T. Wright and Gary Habermas and Mike Licona argument for the historical resurrection, and I could believe in the historical resurrection with certainty and the deepest of conviction and boldness. But if I have not love, I am a resounding gong and a clanging cymbal. A psychologically safe community is one where you are free and able to share doubts and questions and to admit failings and errors and disappointments without fear of judgment or social censure. Sadly, most evangelical churches and organizations, at least most of the ones I've seen, are not psychologically safe by that measure. Once you begin to share doubts and questions, failures and disappointments, you quickly become stigmatized. Perhaps, as in the case of my unfortunate student, you might be outed as a sort of closet heretic and hurfed summarily from your position. Is it any wonder that so many Christians who have so long been hurt and experienced the abuse of these deeply malformative and unhealthy communities end up walking away from them and often end up walking away from the church altogether? True discipleship in a healthy community begins with the love of neighbor, begins with a commitment to pick up your cross and to create safe communities, including psychologically safe communities where you are free to share your doubts and burdens and questions with others without the fear of social censure, let alone getting turfed from your position. Like the man who is desperately pleading to Jesus, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. The church should be the place where when people come forward with questions and doubts, they're not stigmatized, they're not censured, they're not made to feel shame, they're not fired. Rather, they are embraced. People walk alongside them, they encourage them and help them through the struggle. Some years ago, I shared the following illustration in one of my books. I described a plane, an otter. An otter is a little bush plane flying far off in northern Canada, and the plane crashes in the northern woods. And there are two men that were in the plane that are now left lying in the snowbank, waiting for help to arrive. And the first individual says, I am in so much pain. My legs and arms ache. I have a headache. I am in pain all over. The second individual says, that's interesting. I can't feel anything at all. And with that, he drifts off to sleep. Now, which of those two individuals do you think is in worse shape? The person who feels pain or the person who feels nothing at all and falls asleep in the bank peacefully? Clearly, the person who is worse off is the one who feels no pain, because pain is a sign in the body. You are living and engaging with your environment. The lack of pain when there should be pain is the real danger sign, the real red flag. There are so many people who feel pain. They've been told that it's a bad thing in terms of the pain of doubt and of questioning. They've been stigmatized. They've been told to keep those pains to themselves without ever realizing the truth that those pains are a sign of a living, healthy faith. I'm reminded here of the famous words of Frederick Buechner, who said, doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it alive and moving. 100%. The person who doubts the resurrection, but continues on with their vow to follow Jesus and take up their cross and love their neighbor, is far better off than the person who doesn't love their neighbor and never thinks twice about the resurrection and has no doubts. And until the evangelical church begins to get this, until they begin to understand what true discipleship looks like, that it's not simply the assent to a list of doctrines, but it is a living, breathing, loving faith of self sacrifice and service to others. Until they get that, the evangelical church will not be a healthy place.